All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alex Gouldworth, and I am the Chief of Program and Strategy here at Demos. We are so delighted to have you with us today. So, for 25 years, Demos has advanced a bold vision for a just and inclusive democracy and an economy that works for all. Today, we remain steadfast in our commitment to building lasting power for Black and Brown communities. It's because there is no other way to shape a just, inclusive future for this generation and for the next. Indeed, this nation has never lived up to its full promise of liberty and justice for all. As unprecedented and as frightening as this moment is, we've been here before. Since the close of the Civil War, the United States has been a battleground for the ongoing struggle between white supremacists and the proponents of a multiracial democracy. Looking around, we find ourselves in a moment like the period of enslavement, like the days of Jim Crow, where white supremacists and their allies in big business are winning. It's precedented and it's terrible. And the road to a better future has never been easy. But we can look to the past and draw lessons as well as inspirations for the new ways we will invent the future. And so that's what brings us here, right? After these moments of great oppression also come moments of reconstruction. I want you to take a second and think about the flowering of Black communities after the Civil War and the civil rights movement that followed the Jim Crow era. Today, many thinkers, from Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II to Barrett Pittner to Sabeel Rahman to Eric O'Smiley, have their eyes trained on a new moment of reconstruction. And like them, here at Demos, we're thinking, what is the work that it's going to take to make this seismic change for good real? That's what brings us here. At Demos, we see this moment that we're in as a call to action, to look ahead with urgency and resolve. We need the people, that's what Demos means, the people to resist and hold the line, to call out the egregious actions of the administration, and we must continue to hold a vision of a just, multiracial, and inclusive economy and democracy that works for everyone. Okay, so that's the context we're in. How did we get to this webinar? Well, in partnership with social impact leader Aaron Goldman, Demos president Taifa Smith Butler, who you can see on your screen now, joined forces with Nonprofit Quarterly to produce a series on the third Reconstruction that is, if I do say so, riveting. You'll be able to find a link to the series in your chat, and in just a few moments, you'll be hearing from several of the series authors. So, to examine what this moment demands, to trace the through lines connecting today's challenges to earlier struggles for justice, and to offer a bold vision for a more just and inclusive future, we gathered a cohort of leaders, activists, advocates, and organizers to write. Today, you'll get to hear directly from three of them. You'll see Dr. Peniel Joseph, professor, author, and scholar of race and democracy based at the University of Texas, Austin. Demario Cooper, the co-executive director at the Center for Popular Democracy, and Taifa Smith Butler, president of Demos. And we are very thrilled to have this discussion moderated by Steve Dubb, senior editor of economic justice at Nonprofit Quarterly, who co-produced this issue. So before I turn this mic over to Steve to lead a moderated panel discussion with these authors, I wanted to let you know that we will indeed save time at the end for your questions. Submit questions for our panelists at any time during the discussion using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You're also welcome to share your name and your affiliation if you have one to give our panelists a little context for your question. And yes, we are recording this webinar. We'll share the link with you in the coming days in case you want to refer back to it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And on behalf of Nonprofit Quarterly, I want to thank Demos for the partnership. I'll just say really quickly, Nonprofit Quarterly's mission is to advance conversations in civil society. That's a phrase that's used a lot outside the United States, less in the United States, but it means the space between the families and the state where social meaning is contested and constructed. And, I think this struggle for multiracial democracy fits square and center in that conversation that we have to have. So with no further ado, I want to pass the baton to Taifa Smith Butler to start us off. And could you set the stage? And in addition to introducing yourself and your article, talk a little bit more about why Demos decided to launch this conversation about a third Reconstruction and why as you put it well in your article, advocates must move beyond playing defense to dream and plan for liberation now.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Steve. And thank you to our dear friends, Dr. Peniel Joseph and Demario Cooper, and Alex for kicking this off, and all the other authors who contributed to this series. This was a birthing of an opportunity that we saw. And I just want to underscore something that Alex shared in the opening. For those of you who aren't familiar with Demos, we've been doing this work for the last 25 years, and that is trying to advance this just, inclusive, multiracial democracy and economy. And we recognized 25 years ago that we cannot have a multiracial democracy with outsized economic inequality. And so that's why we do the work of economic justice and democracy reform, but also recognize that we won't be able to get to the multiracial democracy but through the path of racial justice. We are very clear. And if I think about this moment that we're living in, we are in a defining moment in America. And when I think about this young multiracial democracy project, and if we think about what that really means, it was just 6 or 7 years before I was born when Black Americans got the rights to be able to be full citizens in this country. And that means by the passage of the, Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, we were able to move in society without government sanctioned segregation, discrimination, and economic exclusion. And so this young project of us leading and governing and participating in our democracy together has been only over about 60 years. And we see right now that there is a movement afoot to really undermine and dismantle some of those civil rights gains that we find at risk right now. And I'm also thinking about how, as a national leader, how these new racist dog whistles that used to only happen on occasion, or they would be in the darkest corners, are now being mainstreamed, and not just whistles, but now full-fledged orchestral symphonies, right, that are being written with sort of a populist melody to attract more people, but also has a white supremacist sort of harmony that keeps this thing in contrast and together with a fascist beat that alienates, that others, and that blames different constituents and different groups, that keeps us from the solidarity that we really need. And so we wanted to be able to frame up who America is for. And it's not to go back to where we had, you know, America for white people or America for certain groups who have wealth and power, but we see a more inclusive and more expansive America, and we want and should be able to name that and build for it. And that is the crux of like our article that we authored in this piece. And I want to recognize that this symphony, this sort of new soundtrack of this authoritarian regime that we're living into, is not the end. The future belongs to a multiracial democracy, and it is our opportunity to rewrite it, to rewrite the institutions that are necessary to foster our humanity, to reset and readjust and change our social norms that continue to undergird our society. And we know those social norms that exist today have been anti-Blackness. That animates white supremacy. And so we have to rewrite those in order for us to have a truly multiracial democracy. And then back to how we reimagine power is critical in this country. And so that's what we wanted to offer. I wanted to offer in this piece because I know the moment is scary. I know the moment is frustrating. It is chaotic, but we can take this moment in the midst of the chaos and really commit ourselves to dreaming and to reimagining. And I want to say this, and we're all very clear, there is no going back, right? These institutions have been dismantled. Our government as we know it has. So we are required, it is necessary for us to reimagine these institutions. And so that was my offering. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with all of you. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Taifa. Yeah, well said. Uh, Peniel, if you could, introduce yourself a little bit more, and building on what Taifa talked about, talk a little bit about your article and what you mean by a third Reconstruction.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Taifa. My name is Peniel Joseph. I teach at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm a proud native New Yorker, proud son of Haitian immigrants who came to the United States in 1966. My mom was a labor activist, trade unionist, my late mother at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, SCIU 1199 till we die and into the beyond. So I come from an organizing background and a background of really Pan-Africanist organizers and intellectuals and thinkers. And what I want to talk about just very briefly, and I'm timing myself with the 5 minutes, is this idea of a third Reconstruction, um, the power of storytelling and narrative history and narrative power, but also this notion of citizenship and dignity. So when we
Mm,
think about a third Reconstruction, what we're saying is that Black people have reconstructed American democracy over three different periods. The first period was right after the Civil War, where we transformed the United States and the promise of multiracial democracy. We made it a reality between 1865 and 1898. We can bring it all the way up to 1920, like the historian Manisha Sinha. And we did that not only through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, we did that by creating agricultural communities, by creating mutual aid societies, by creating colleges and universities, by turning the churches into schoolhouses all across the United States. That's what we did, and there were global reverberations to what we did as well in the United States. The second Reconstruction is really the heroic period of the Civil Rights Movement, and when we think about that period, if the first Reconstruction, those who believed in multiracial democracy, they lost the narrative war. The redemptionists, the white supremacists, the Klan, they won, and they got, as we've seen in our articles on in the third Reconstruction series on philanthropy, how philanthropy supported eugenics and scientific racist research. That's because we lost the narrative war. The idea of Black dignity and Black citizenship, even as Black people continue to believe in it and really enact it in archipelagos of multiracial democracy, we lost it as a nation, and Black people were the victims of violence, racial pogroms, white-led mob riots, and mass incarceration that really starts with the convict lease system in the 19th century. When we think about the 20th century, again, Black people led a reimagining of American democracy through a civil rights movement that really was born on the backs of sharecroppers and labor activists and Black women like Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, and the Black men like the Dr. Kings and the Malcolm X's and the other people. When we think about this idea of where we're at now, a third Reconstruction, we are currently locked in a narrative war of how do we define dignity and citizenship. All these attacks on Black women and Black men, the massive unemployment rates, the firings that have happened at the federal and the state and the local level, the police brutality, the assaults on labor, and really the notion of solidarity. Turning solidarity into allyship is a neoliberal trick, right? Solidarity, like Dorian Warren and Derek Hamilton write in our third Reconstruction series, it's a moral imagining. It's not transactional, right? It's Ubuntu, right? And so when we think about this notion of Reconstruction in our own time, what we are facing is an existential crisis where Black people have always taught us what dignity and citizenship means. Dignity is something we are all born with, and it is God given, and we all have it. Citizenship is merely the external recognition of that dignity. And what we need in this third Reconstruction is to understand that we all have dignity. We all have dignity, and we should extend citizenship to everyone. So that means not just abolishing ICE raids, it means understanding that folks who are queer, who are trans, who are HIV positive, who are poor, who are disabled, who are neurodivergent, who are unhoused, have dignity and citizenship, right? Wherever they're from, because morally we stand in solidarity with those who have been historically marginalized, who are abused, who are victims of domestic violence, who are cash poor, right? Who are the least of these, who are despised. That's what Dr. King meant when he talked about the beloved community. That's what Ella Baker meant when she told the young people who she organized February 1st, after February 1st, 1960, April 15th, 1960, at Shaw University. She said this is about more than just a hamburger, right? It wasn't just about desegregation. It's always been about dignity. So, in closing, when we think about this third Reconstruction, this is about dignity and citizenship for all people, but we know it's a multiracial society that we need. And this is not about going back, and it's not just about defending our lives. It's about how do we imagine a society that everyone counts and we have dignity and citizenship for all people, including those who oppose us and those who say that we are their enemies. Because if we live in a democracy, we're not living according to what Dr. King said, enemy politics. Thank you.
Thanks, Peniel. DeMario, I think that's a pretty good cue for you, but since you're writing about the 14th Amendment and citizenship, but if you could introduce yourself, talk about the article and how you connect, something that might seem quite technical, like the 14th Amendment, to a community organizing group like the one you're co-leader of. You're on mute.
I said to Mario Cooper, I'm really happy to be here. I was really saying to myself, note to self, don't go after Dr. Joseph. But because I really do appreciate everything you're saying. I definitely am completely aligned. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I'm from a single parent household. I grew up in the middle of the drug war. We saw all of the men in my family and some of the women get incarcerated after like this cliff of employment, and then this mass incarceration or carceral like strategy that got implemented in my teenage and young and teenage years. Um, as an organization, we're 48 affiliates. We're in 35 states, DC, Puerto Rico. We are mainly organizing Black, Brown, and working class communities. So this conversation is critical, both because of the moment we're in and because we're operating out of context. Even the movements that we've had, it feels like we are out of context with the moment. I think that, like you said, the revisionists have done a really good job of capturing the narrative and confusing people about what's happening right now. Like they can't tell you that something's not wrong with people being snatched or families being separated. They can confuse you about why the things are happening. And that's part of like losing that narrative. So our organization, we build power with grassroots folks, right? Like our base are working class people. And so, part of the thing in our assessment is, when we look at the 14th Amendment and all the things that Dr. Joseph and Taifa are talking about, like all of the things around the idea that human rights and the human value and our own human potential is really a part of the project that is America. Even if we go back to the beginning, or what we said, we're going into the 250th anniversary of this country in the next year, and there's going to be a lot of conversation about what happened in 1776, et cetera. But there is a conversation that we need to also be having this year about what the 14th Amendment means to everyone who is not a white landowning male, right? Like even the folks who fought in the Continental War. There's a great like Ken Burns documentary that just came out, and it talks about the actual Continental soldiers fighting for the rights of man, for this idea that all humans are human, that we could create a governing structure that actually would conspire to help human beings reach their highest potential. We call that freedom. But what happens is, in another 100 years or so, there's a war that creates a more perfect union. This is a famous quote, right? A more perfect union that expands those rights of the Bill of Rights and expands those rights to more people inside of the country. Basically saying that the folks who were, in chattel slavery, enslaved, like what do we do with them is the argument that's happening around the Reconstruction amendments, like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And to be clear for folks, the 13th Amendment says a human can't own a human. It doesn't really say the state can't own you. That's why we become state property and then can lease you back out to humans, which is the convict leasing system, which is the beginning of mass incarceration. But the 14th Amendment actually makes some very clear things that are relevant to the moment we're currently in. So in the 14th Amendment, it basically says, because they're trying to figure out what is the status of citizenship of these folks, it says if you're born here, you're a citizen, right? And if you're born here, you're a citizen, you get the right to due process and equal protection under the law. But it also says that any person in this country, any human here, gets the right to due process and equal protection, which is why one of our affiliates, CASA, is currently in a fight with the Trump administration in this case coming up, which is like really CASA versus Trump, but it's questioning birthright citizenship. But we should come back to that in the discussion. The other thing that the 14th Amendment says and this is very interesting, it says basically that if you are a state that does not let every eligible voter vote, and the second clause of the 14th Amendment, it says that your representation inside of Congress is proportionate to the number of votes of people who are eligible to vote that you allow to vote in your state. Right. So if you think about it on a real deep level, in places where we are seeing voter suppression or like Section 5 being gutted out of Voter Rights Act, or like this history, like diminishing people's ability to vote should also diminish that state's representation inside of the United States Congress. The third thing bars anyone who participated or supported or aided and abetted an insurrection or a rebellion against the United States is not valid and cannot hold an executive elected office. Right. So if you were somebody who pardoned a bunch of people that ran in the Capitol and defecated on desks, et cetera, then you may not be qualified or even allowed per our Constitution to hold that office. And then the last set of things, it basically says that if you are a Confederate traitor, we are not paying the bills for liberating these humans that you want. That's the 14th Amendment. We really need to understand those pieces because that amendment is also used over and over again to continue to expand legal protections for people under the law. If you look at like the cases that have been won, Brown v. Board, the Loving case, Gideon, like these cases that allow people to actually have more rights and have more potential, like their human potential to be more expressed in the public arena. So we are, as an organization, I know I got to stop. I'm past my 5 minutes. As an organization, one, we are trying to run a narrative campaign that also allows us to build more power in the middle of that narrative campaign. Understand that the issues that we care about are deeply connected to this like human rights amendment that was put in our Constitution.
Thanks, Demario. Want to there's actually a question, in the chat here that I think is somewhat related to the question I was going to ask anyway, but I'll throw both together a little bit. But 5 years ago, we were told that the nation faced a racial reckoning. And this was supposed to be a progressive moment. It didn't work out that way. I'll just keep it brief in that way. And there was a question in the chat about, are there specific moments from organizing history that you can draw wisdom from? This question sort of asks, in a sense, the opposite, but you can do both, I guess. Why was forward movement after the George Floyd protests so limited in terms of racial and economic justice? Why was it stymied? Why are we where we are right now? And how do we, at long last, end this cycle where you seem to have progress followed by backlash, followed by maybe some progress, and we know the cycle. Anyway, I don't know. I'll throw it to Peniel to get us started, and then you guys can jump in from there.
I'd say very quickly, it's complicated. I'd say that on one level, right in the context of the racial reckoning, there was progress with philanthropy and nonprofits, and that did lead to the election of Biden-Harris. And I will say, in defense of the Biden-Harris administration, irrespective of ideological or partisanship, they did pursue policies that aided towards the pursuit of multiracial democracy. And when you think about the child tax credit, put the least number of children below the poverty line in the history of the country, in the history of the republic. Disproportionately, that impacted Black and brown children. I want people to know that. The Kamala Harris and Joe Biden administration also signed equity presidential orders that provided more access for Black women to the White House and on committees than had ever happened in the history of the Republic, including we have top scholars like Dr. Alondra Nelson at the Institute for Advanced Study, who's the AI czar for the Biden White House. So we can't take away certain things. That they also did a reparations for black farmers, over $1 billion in reparations for black farmers. So when we think about that racial reckoning, we have to understand narratively there were points where we did succeed narratively. Even when we think about things like the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah Jones, and the way in which these things, especially black women authors, some black men too, and people of color authors, sold the most books in 1 year than they had ever sold, according to bestsellerdom and New York Times and other data, right? There was also a backlash. There was also a backlash. So you think about the backlash of the Rufos and the 1776 Commission and anti-wokeness, the hoax about CRT, critical race theory, and then by 2021, dozens of states and Ron DeSantis and Florida and others putting in these anti-woke, these book banning, these anti-black policies all together. So on one level, what I think the reckoning showed was the country was split into at least two camps. And the camps were Reconstructionist camps. And we write about this throughout the series. Reconstructionists are those who believe in multiracial democracy. In a way, I think the two of the most powerful Reconstructionists in history are W.E.B. Du Bois and Toni Morrison. Du Bois, through his work as a historian, showed us what Reconstruction could be in a book called Black Reconstruction. Morrison, there's a way to read Toni Morrison and talk about Morrisonian democracy, where her whole literary genius is showing us the potential and power of Black people during Reconstruction, with her protagonists being Black women in their fullness, in their full expansiveness, right? Which is just genius. If you sort of reread Toni Morrison through the lens of Reconstruction, you can see that she's a political and literary genius, but she's pointing us towards a different future if we believe in ourselves and we find the stories of ourselves actually have enough to save us and save the rest of the world. That's what you read when you read not just Beloved, but Sula, The Bluest Eye, Song of Solomon, Paradise. It's all there in Toni Morrison. Her nonfiction too, but in the fiction, it's right there. So I would dispute the notion that nothing happened, because we have to admit that something like the Black Lives Matter movement, that was really started by Black women, by queer Black women, we have to admit that we got a lot of progress done, but there were redemptionists who are the white supremacists who they haven't defeated us, but they engaged in a political, moral, policy struggle that has brought us to the brink right here. And they aligned with elements of authoritarianism that have brought us to the brink here. So I want us to rethink the idea that nothing happened with the racial reckoning and after not just George Floyd, but Breonna Taylor. There's a point where Breonna Taylor is on the cover of Vanity Fair, and Ta-Nehisi and all these people are writing about her. And that counts, that matters, and that happened. So we had victories during this time too. We didn't have the presidency in 2020. We didn't have the Congress. More policy should have been passed. We didn't get the George Floyd Racial Justice Act passed, or the Voting Rights and the First Step Act passed, the John Lewis, but we did have victories, and we have to keep that in mind.
Fair enough. Thanks. And I appreciate the point about Morrisonian democracy for sure. I don't know, Taifa,
Yeah,
Tamara,
I
you have
wanted to
any
jump.
quick
I wanted
thoughts?
to jump
Yeah.
in here because I agree and appreciate everything Peniel said, and I also think about, Demos has always talked about our fates are linked and shared, and the more that we think about that, again, this goes back to how we need the solidarity across our groups to be able to advance this vision of humanity and the beloved community, and to be able to write the rules that will actually help govern so that we can live into that, right? And I think what we continue to see is, much like after the racial reckoning, we finally saw people clutch their pearls and say, oh, yes, racial injustice does exist, right? And agree with us. And the worldwide global movement for Black lives was evident. It was palpable, and it went on for weeks. And to Peniel's point, yes, we were able to start to concretize that through executive orders and commitments from this government to address equity and to write, governmental policies and practices that would address discrimination and would make sure that we advance some policies that could really help address repair. We keep talking about repair in terms of reparations, and there's a whole other conversation there that we as a nation should have, but many people are fearful of having, because what does it mean to really look back at the 400 years of slavery and think about what is owed to those ancestors, right, to those descendants. But I think we still have work to do to bring about the work of changing hearts and minds. And I know that when I've been in the policy space for a long, long time, and when we would talk about changing social norms and values and belief systems, I'm like, that's not the work of public policy. Like, our work is like, what's the policy that we can put in place that can really change the material conditions and change the problems that we see in our society? But honestly, our hearts and minds are part of the problem, right? And so I think that there is work that has to be done. There is a ministry that has to be advanced to really ensure that we have the multiracial solidarity that we need within the labor movement. That's what Dorian and Derek wrote about, but also within our organizing and apparatus. Like, we have to really talk to the multiracial working class, and that's the work that Demario and Ana Lilia and others are doing, which is really important. But to me, what I heard during this, period of racial unrest and racial reckoning were those messages of white grievance that we heard post Civil War, that we heard during the Civil Rights Movement. What about us? We're now being discriminated against as white people, and that creates the sort of the invitation for these fascist, policies and fascist approaches, because we then make sure that there is division among us. And I think this is the most important point, is that when we work on policies that can solve the challenges that are faced by those who have been excluded and put on the margins, everyone will benefit. And so how do we, and I think there's a question in the chat about how do we show the real hard data of how this economic project has been disproportionately negative for Black and Brown people, for people in rural communities, for poor folks. We can show that material conditions have not changed. And that's why people today are demanding different. And so we have hard evidence of the numbers where the wealth has been proliferated to those at the very top. And because they have outsized economic power and political influence, that they continue to write the rules that don't benefit everyday working people, but it benefits those in these shareholder seats and those that are in these places of wealth. And those are the things that we as a society need to address.
Great, thanks, Taifa. Demario, I'm going to move to the next question. If you want to add something to the previous, that's okay. But can you name an initiative, movement, or effort that gives you hope in the present? So I think this follows nicely on Peniel's comment from a little while ago.
I mean, the thing I would say, kind of both connected to the last question and this question, is that part of the thing that's happening, the economic project that is happening in the middle of Black Lives Matter, the last thing you were finishing on, Taifa, like, people are experiencing economic pressures. And when that's happening and anxiety is building in your household around what the affordable, like, kitchen table things are, and then someone shows up and tells you that these pressures are coming from this set of people, right? Like, so the backlash then is like, I believe, I'm from Ohio, so I know that, like, the same counties that voted for Obama twice voted for Trump, right? Like, you can look, this is data. You can go look at this data. It's not that these people are like hardcore hardened racists. It's just that the economic system, which our government, towards your last point, Taif, is actually captured in a way by you know, it's captured by capital, clearly. But I think the way people experience our government is through through the perversion of capital's intentions and ambitions. And so then they say, well, the government is the problem. But in organizing, we teach people, like, the government is not the problem, the government is the prize. You win or lose the government based on how much power you have. And part of the narrative story is about how are we a we? I think that's part of the story. And what happens on the other side when there are economic pressures, what gets geared up is that the we are white folks and the they are everyone else. And because we are like 1% aligned around our skin, then, capital then aligns that entire, apparatus around like the racist reaction to like black advancement. So I want to say that to also talk about the things that are making me hopeful right now, which is that during the Black Lives Matter movement, you had a bunch of movement activists. So, like, people were getting out in the streets. You have massive protests and marches. A lot of people who thought they were organizers were actually movement like organizers and aligners, which is great because that is a form of organizing. But what's happening in the ecosystem now is people are realizing that the long-term project of bringing more people, not just to a march or a rally, but how are we incorporating those folks into a power building strategy where people are sitting at local democratic organizations and creating strategies together around both how to affect their local municipality or state municipality. But even now we're like in these formations. Taifa and I are part of a national networks group that would not have been possible 5 years ago. Like, let me be really clear. It would not have been possible, but the environment is creating the potential for us to align deeper on our side and to get clear about the way that we should engage each other. Because part of when you think about Kingian nonviolence or nonviolence in general, part of the nonviolent thing is not just going on a march and letting somebody hit you with something and staying peaceful. Really, it's a practice of how you live your life. And so then when we think about nonviolence, we think about how we are in relationship with each other, right? Like if you think about like we don't want negative peace, which are principles, like we actually think conflict deepens our relationship, not divides our relationship. So this thing that we've done or like cancel culture, et cetera, there is a movement now that I think people are trying to attach to where we align more than like exposing where we're divided on the side of folks who are the reconstructionist side of this society. So that is exciting to me. I think that aligning around like us being humans and figuring out it was a question earlier about like how do you connect people to this 14th Amendment thing, but there's a way to look at the court cases that provide all these things that we care about in this society, and people who work on those issues may not understand that we have a common legacy inside of the 14th Amendment. We have a common history inside of the 14th Amendment. And while the other side is talking about who are heritage Americans, right? Like like they talk about heritage Americans and we talk about American Americans. So there's like a way that we are trying to locate ourselves in this history and in this legacy to help us move in the current, but also build for the future.
Thanks, Tamara.
See, if I could say
Yeah,
really quickly about the hope piece.
yeah.
What happened in New York as a native New Yorker in Zohran Mamdani's election, first mayor to get over 1 million votes since um, uh, John Lindsay in 1969, 56 years ago, but who talks about Yemeni and talks about Senegalese and Muslim and Jewish and Christian is very, very important. It's very, very hopeful. The nation is a nation of immigrants, and that gives me huge hope. But he also talked about the working class, like Derek Hamilton and Dorian Warren did in our series. And somebody said in the Q&A, what do we mean by asking Taifa, what does she mean by the working class? I'll tell you, as somebody who's from the Black working class, what I mean are people who are living paycheck to paycheck. It's multiracial. So it's not just white folks in Indiana and Ohio, although they're included. It's not just white coal miners in West Virginia, although they're included. It's people who are Puerto Rican and Dominican and African and Haitian and from Mississippi and from Alabama, and they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they're struggling for dignity and citizenship every single day, right? Some of them are part of a laboring class that has not been hyper educated. Some of them are part of the hyper educated class because there's groups of people who are living paycheck to paycheck in the nonprofit, in the K through 12, in the higher education, and in the corporate sphere too. And they're in the gig economy. So the working class is capacious, it's multiracial, it's straight and queer, it's trans, it is people who are Christians and secular and Muslims, and it's people who are indigenous and part of the indigenous nations. It's all of it. So when we think about the working class, but one thing that's important for us when we talk about this hope, and Taifa mentioned this early, anti-blackness is still the main anchor and the detriment to multiracial democracy in the United States, including among Mamdani's coalition in New York City. This country is rooted in hating Black people, in saying that we are less than, in not connecting the fact that we are disproportionately overrepresented in every single negative social economic indicator in the United States and underrepresented in all the positive, and blaming us and pathologizing us instead of saying that this is the moral hazard of living in the United States, the most racist place in the history of the world, right? And so that continues to plague us right now. That's why you can blame and fire Black women. You can blame and fire Black people. You can continue to criminalize 5 and 6 year old Black girls and boys. And as a parent, I see this every single day. I see this every single day. So we have to have this hope, but understand that the dividing line, it's not just class. I'm all for the class warriors. I'm right there with you. It is race and class and gender and sexual all mixed in together. So it's important for us to understand this, right? So even as we are building solidarity that gives me hope, we have to be able to talk about racial slavery. That includes Mondani, that includes AOC, that includes the white left, that right now, as I speak, is throwing us under the bus and saying we got too woke over the last decade.
Yeah,
And that's why white men are so angry. Where has the power transference been?
that's right.
Where is the trillions of dollars that Black people suddenly got in the last decade? Where are the reparations? These are all lies upon lies upon lies. But that's why I say the narrative is so important. We have to tell the truth about our narrative. We have to hold ourselves accountable, but tell the truth. And we've got to love ourselves. We got to say we love Black people
Yeah.
because this country does not love us. It does not love us, including people who say they want to stand with us and be allies with us. It's always our fault.
Yeah.
We're always unqualified. Merit always leaves the room as soon as we enter. That's what Frantz
Right.
Fanon taught us, right? But it's really sanity and logic and
Yeah.
morality leaving the room as soon as we enter. So it's important for us to never forget that. And people like bell hooks and Black feminists have taught us that for centuries.
Thanks, Benil. Appreciate it. Um, Taifa, I wanted to ask actually an audience question because it came up, Benil just talked about Mamdani in New York, and it was a question from somebody in New York, I happen to know the person, about what policy options are there? You're at a policy shop, so I thought you might have some ideas.
Policy options writ large or policy options for New
In New
York?
York City specifically, with
Oh,
Mamdani being elected. Yeah.
I mean, well, he led with his three his three things, and
Yeah.
apparently, to Peniel's point, it animated the most people to vote for his project of free buses, right, and addressing some of the other things. I forgot what the other two things are at the moment, but I
Affordability, Taifa,
yes,
affordability and
yes,
rent control. Rent control,
yes.
affordability, and the free buses. That's it.
Yeah.
And the child care, Taifa,
Yes,
free
thank you,
child
thank
care.
you. And I'm over here in New Jersey in one of the highest taxing states, right, in terms of property tax. So I get it, and the people get it. And I think that's what animated people to hear him be very clear and upfront about his agenda and making sure that it was going to change, hopefully, the material conditions. And I think as I was talking with Demario and other leaders, this is what we're hearing on the doors. We know from an economic justice standpoint, the most like critical thing that people need is housing and affordable housing. It is the number one economic issue that families are facing right now. And so he led with that. And I think this is where we need to think about what solutions are going to help people from addressing their material conditions. And when I think about we talked about purpose, and I think about Dr. King's quote about power is merely realizing your purpose. And so when we think about this sort of Maslow's hierarchy of need and what's at the bottom of that triangle is like people's basic needs to be able to this assistance that they need to thrive and to actually be able to live into their purpose. And so I think those are the policy solutions that first and foremost government has to be about protecting and fostering the public good. And I think if we think about public good in the most expansive approach, that is healthcare, that is housing, that is education, that is childcare, that is all the things that will help us level the playing field, because every family, every person needs those things to be able to thrive. And then we layer on the other pieces of policies that will actually help people live into their self-determination and their power. So
Can
for
I?
me, each leader, whether they're local or national, needs to be listening to the challenges facing society and then solve for those. And we have too much economic inequality today, where our tax code is written to benefit the wealthy and the rich. And we need to tax them proportionately so that we can have enough money to support the public good, but actually provide the resources that we need to help families fare better. And to me, there is plenty. And I think in our society, we continue to use this scarcity mindset that there's not enough, when we can write tax codes to give away money to those who are very rich, to the billionaires, to the corporate elites and the corporate class, but not have enough for people to be able to have good public schools in their community, to not be able to have the health care that they need to be able to do their work and support their families. So those are the things that I think need to change. And I think Mondami led with the people's agenda. And that's what we need more of at the federal and the local level.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to ask a couple quick questions from the audience,
Mm.
and then I'll close with our prepared question. But just to like profit cover one, so there's various questions. I'm going to throw out two different things. One is about uh, how we include Native people, Indigenous people in this conversation about the third Reconstruction. There's also a question about how to include um, the white working class, and as part of, so either end, it's to build a multiracial democracy, absolutely have to address anti-blackness. That is core, as Peniel was saying. But how do we think of this an inclusive vision?
I mean, I just want to say a thing towards like, because I'm reading the chat and I seen somebody in there talking about the NFL, NBA, and how they created the most economically and great organization. And if you look at the pictures from 1950 to the day, I mean, I think this is a great example of exactly what Dr. Joseph is talking about. That someone thinks that that means that the NFL is somehow like an anti-racist place, when this kid took a knee just to say stop killing black people, and his entire career got destroyed. Or even in the last year, like I'm from Ohio. I'm a Cleveland football team fan. There is no reason, we don't know why Shador Sanders was put last or all this stuff. Like no one can figure it out. But that's the way racism works. And like we act, I just want to say this thing about racialized capitalism and understanding the connection between these two. We have to do that in order for us to move forward. And we have to tell a better story about what was happening with poor white people during the time of enslavement. Like, right, like if slavery was happening today, and all the people who worked at the jobs that working class people work at now were enslaved people, there would be a lot of white people who would not be able to take care of their families, right? Like who would work at the Walmart, the Dollar General, et cetera. So if you think about an agrarian society and you live next to a gigantic plantation, like you are either trying to work for that land, that plantation owner, or you're struggling. And so this like false narrative that somehow white people were better when there was enslaved people, especially in an economic sense, is ridiculous, right? Like it is actually crazy. Even thinking about worker rights for white folks in the 20th century, they weren't better. If you could have a bunch of low labor workers who always have to work, like that is not a way to have economic possibility and future for yourself. And so I think this conversation, and I feel this regularly, is like it's hard for people to understand that like really white folks in this country, especially if you're an Ellis Island white person, because you might not even be a heritage American. Let me be clear to all the white folks out here. If we get into a real who's the heritage American people and who are not Americans by birthright citizenship, if you came through Ellis Island, you may not be a citizen in that conversation. But that's a different thing. But this narrative that white people are somehow better with racism, there are actual economic reasons and histories that we know they're not, right? Like even to get privileged, like, LBJ said, eat Jim Crow. But like, this is a conversation that we need to have both with ourselves, like with black folks inside of this place, around like our role in actually protecting and building the democracy, that this is our thing. And then there's another conversation that needs to be had with white working class folks who are standing on the sibling lines, worried about their SNAP benefits, going to be struggling around their healthcare in this next year or so, that they are not like, you don't have a deep alignment with these folks. They don't look at you. They look at you like us, like maybe a step over black folks. But trust, they're trying to exploit workers, and you're a worker with no power. And so there's a way we need to retell the story of what the project is. Again, I'll return to that, but I'll be quiet for you. Send me that text.
Okay, thanks. Peniel, if you could talk a little bit about indigenous nations. I know you put a comment in the chat, so.
Yeah, so I think the indigenous nation question is a great question. Yes, the indigenous nations are absolutely a part of this. And when we think about historically in terms of multiracial democracy, and when you even read the 1619 Project, there's great stuff in there on Black and Native American solidarities with each other, right? Of course, there's been conflicts, but there's Black and Native American solidarities, Black and Asian American solidarities. There's Black and Latino, Latinx solidarities. It's important for us to remember that. So the whole idea of America and settler colonialism, this is something that needs to be repaired. There's over 2 million indigenous people in the country. Most of them live outside of reservations, and they live in urban centers. When we think about the second Reconstruction, the what was then called the American Indian Movement, AIM, was a big part of that second Reconstruction. Black folks were in solidarity with them, including Black Panthers. But there was multiracial solidarity when you read the book, Like a Hurricane, from Wounded Knee to Alcatraz and Native American takeovers of Alcatraz. So this is important. And of course, there's a Black Native American connection with Florida history, especially, but other histories, African American Seminoles, some who have not gotten access to the BIA blood certificate to get access that they deserve, even though they lived with Native Americans and at times get married into Native Americans and have that bloodline too. So it's a complicated story, but they are absolutely part of this. And that connects to what Demario was saying. When we think about working class, the narrative war in the United States transforms working class into white, and we are just a bunch of orphans, the rest of us out here, especially Black women like my late mother, who was working at Mount Sinai Hospital for 40 years and on picket lines because she took me and my older brother to these picket lines. So we were not just orphaned and just out there. We were part of this community, right? So we have to think of working class as multiracial, justice for janitors, bus riders unions. We've got to think of it as something that can be led by Black and Latino women alongside of white men, right? Alongside of Asian American and indigenous folks too. So part of it, and this goes back to what I said at the start, the narrative war is what we need to win, because right now there's an active narrative, even among so-called progressive circles, of saying that Black people and their woke allies overshot the mark and we ended meritocracy, including in philanthropy. They don't like to see Taifa as head of Demos. They don't like to see Demario. All this stuff is saying as soon as we enter the door, merit leaves. So how can we be leaders, right? And this is antithetical to the world and the world building that we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Taifa, I want to pass it to you. As your piece, talks about building for the future, and as we resist the backlash and build for the future, what new norms, institutions, and forms of power do you believe can be developed to advance racial and economic justice and liberation more broadly speaking? And if you can throw it in a little bit, what are some bridging strategies that you've seen that are effective in advancing that vision?
Thanks for that. I think about as those of us who are, as Mario mentioned, are getting information and what I think about this moment in particular is, post Civil War Reconstruction only lasted 12 years, and then there was a quick clap back, and then we had Black codes and Jim Crow, and that period lasted, 80 some years. And then we got to sort of the civil rights movement. Is how long this period of resistance will last depends on how quickly we get information to push back and demand different. And so to me, as I think about these pillars that undergird authoritarianism, we talk about the corporate pillar and how, Dee talked about like the corporate capture of our lawmakers and the money in politics that continues to influence whether or not we can get the things that we need to live and thrive, is that has to fundamentally change. And I think the institution of government, one, we've got to get corporations and money interests out of those seats of power and sort of diffuse that corporate influence. And so to me, thinking about how we ensure that we have a representative and accountable government. Because again, based on what we see now, the polarization that we see in our politics with Republicans and Democrats ain't it. It's not solving the problem, right? And because of the corporate influence, we've got corporate capture on both sides of the aisle, and the material conditions and the policies still don't get passed because we get sort of characterized as identity politics, or we are somehow, too woke, as Peniel said. And so I really think if we can create the populist movement that really says this new American rising majority demands a set of fundamental changes in our politic and in our policies, that will create the momentum and the forward shift. And I think about what we saw or see in the conservative circles, where this president has written more executive orders than in any term pretty much, and it's been as a result of a 900-page plan that they wrote for him to be able to govern on. And so for us who are the Reconstructionists, those of us who are the sort of justice warriors and believe in a multiracial democracy, what is our 900 pages? What are the plans that we are putting in place so we can say these institutions are needed? So that's where I'm really focused on what are the new strategies that we can deploy to make sure that people have more direct democracy and more direct influence, so we can write the rules so that the people rule truly. And our representative government and our representative democracy is broken when we see the kind of corporate capture. So to me, how do we change it to get more people directly writing the rules, more direct democracy, more access to the ballot, and then also from an economic project, we need to hold corporations accountable and change our tax code so that the rich pay more, tax the rich so that we have more resources, and then fundamentally change our societal norms. And I think that's the work of our religious leaders. It's a moral imperative for all of us. And so I think this is where we need to preach, and speak truth to power, because the division, the hate, the bigotry will only keep us from being not only individually reaching our purpose, but as a nation, we won't be as strong as we can be. So those are just a few of the things that I think about in terms of the norms that need to be changed. And I will say this, when we talk about liberation, when we talk about having freedom, which is what God given inalienable right, that we talk about, what are the things that we can do to change the conversation so that we all, from a human standpoint, live into that humanity of freedom for everyone?
Great, thanks. So we're almost at time. I'll give 15 seconds to Peniel and then to Demario to close out.
Well, I just say it's an honor to have been here with everyone. I think these are hopeful days. We have to build a beloved community, and we can bridge differences by focusing on dignity and citizenship for all people.
Great. Demario, you get the last word. You're on mute.
I would also echo what Dr. Joseph said, and I would say, the 14th Amendment and these laws and values and ideals that actually built the core of our country will never be put into effect unless people build power together and work together to really create the country we deserve and want for our future. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So I just want to thank everybody on this call. To say the obvious, this is not a 1 hour conversation, so we got to what questions we could. Thank you for all the comments and the questions, and apologies for not getting to them all. But I want to thank Taifa Smith Butler from Dēmos for conceptualizing the series and for being on this webinar, for her contributions. Dr. Peniel Joseph, who of course has written on the third Reconstruction and helped inspire the series, and Demario Cooper and all the great community organizing work that you and the team at Popular Democracy do. So thanks to all of you, and thanks to everyone's questions. And please do look at the articles online, and please, reach out to us and let us know how we can continue the conversation and cover the parts that we weren't able to cover in this hour. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Steve.
Yes, thanks, Steve.
Thank you, the whole team, for
Thanks, everybody.
Ditto.